Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Chris from AppSimo with the Remote Work Academy, and today we are joined with none other than Mark Manson. Mark Manson is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Everything is Fcked, a book about hope and the subtle art of not giving a fuck, a counterintuitive approach to living a good life, the mega bestseller that reached #1 in 14 different countries. Mark's books have been translated into more than 50 languages and sold over 12 million copies worldwide. Mark runs one of the largest personal growth websites in the world, markmanson.net, a blog with more than 2 million monthly readers and 500,000 subscribers, making him one of the largest and most successful independent publishers on the internet. His writing is often described as self-help for people who hate self-help, a no BS brand of life advice and cultural commentary that has struck a chord with people around the globe. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Forbes, Vice, CNN, and Vox, among many others, and he is currently in New York City, ground zero right now. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. All things considered.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people right now, everything is feeling pretty fucked. How are you thinking about what's going on?
Everything is kind of fucked. It's funny because I wrote that book when things were great, and actually, the
Everything's
the
really
whole
fucked now.
the whole idea behind that book was kind of everything's great and nobody's happy, and there's something about life being comfortable and easy and predictable that like actually makes us go a little bit crazy. But you know, it, I guess we kind of go crazy when shit hits the fan too. So it's strangely, not much has changed, I think, in terms of how people are interacting with the world.
Yeah, which in and of itself kind of shows how luckily so many people are isolated, at least by certain degrees, from a lot of what's going on in terms of like, I think there's obviously a lot of people, 26 million people have filed for unemployment, but there's also a lot of people who, your day is just kind of mildly altered, but it feels very, very strange to be going about it. And you published an article yesterday about how there's kind of these big two complex systems that we basically know nothing about, the
Yeah.
virus as well as the economy. Can you talk a bit about kind of what you were addressing in that article?
Sure. So I feel like we hit the phase. There was like this brief period for about a month when things started that I feel like everybody was kind of on the same page. It was a breath of fresh air. Like everybody was like, "Oh my God, this is a big deal. Let's band together and everybody go home, close your doors, close down the businesses. Like everybody get on the same page about that." And then slowly, there were different philosophies and takes about it. And then I feel like starting around a couple of weeks ago, everybody just kind of picked their favorite hill and put their flag on it and was like, okay, now this is what I stand for, and started attacking each other. Um, and so everybody's like got their talking points and just starts like laying into each other and calling each other liars. It's all the typical polarization and bullshit that we're used to. And that just kind of saddened me because we do live in such unprecedented times. And I my job is to basically sit on the internet and read things and process them and then kind of re-explain them for people or repackage them for people. And so I really dug into a lot of the research around COVID-19 and what's going on. And it's just, there's just bad data everywhere. And it's not anybody's fault. Like nobody's trying to lie about it. Nobody's like trying to like pull one over on anybody. It's just, we've only been doing this for a couple months, and so we have there, good studies have not had a chance to complete. Data that has come out is very partial. It's not done correctly, so everybody's kind of like just picking and choosing their favorite numbers and then getting upset about them. So I wrote this huge article yesterday where I just went through and just showed all of the contradictory data and incomplete evidence, and basically come to the conclusion of like, we don't know what the hell's going on. So stop pretending like you do. And let's wait for the numbers to come in, like let's do our best. Let's all like, put the sweatpants back on and relax for a little bit. Because we have no, and that's true not only with the virus and how it's spreading throughout society, but it's also true with the economic impact. Like, yeah, we've lost tons and tons of jobs and businesses have shut down and people are going broke. But at the same time, it's like the demand is still there. You know, it's like when things open up, people are dying to get back to work. They're dying to go out and spend money and do things. So we're just kind of in uncharted territory. And I feel like my role as a writer is often just, I guess, like being the really obnoxious guy at the party who like says what people need to hear, but nobody wants to hear. And in this case, it was, you know, shut the fuck up about COVID-19. We don't know what's happening yet.
And you had a whole chapter in The Subtle Art about uncertainty and like how to deal with uncertainty and how everything we think we know is eventually proven wrong. How do you recommend people like foster that humility? It seems like somebody, as people have been doing, is just taking one side that you address in the article where it's like, I'm going to cherry pick these pieces and then that's my worldview and I'm going to go from here. Like, how do you build that humility?
I think the first thing is to recognize the tendency in yourself. Like we're all, as animals, uncertainty equates in our brains to insecurity, you know? So it's like, if we don't know what's going to happen, that means that a potential threat could harm us. And so our minds are constantly looking for things to hang on to and to cling to give us that sense of security within ourselves. And we all have this tendency and we all do it in our own kind of special snowflake ways. But like, I think the first thing is to just recognize you have that tendency and then pay attention when you start doing it. You know, I notice myself when I start reading stuff online, like I'll read an article with a bunch of different facts and stuff. And as soon as I hit one that kind of confirms my own perceptions, I'm like, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I have to stop myself and be like, okay, wait, like maybe he doesn't, maybe I don't. Just kind of come back to that state of it's okay to not know. You know, like there are still things that you can decide to be certain about for yourself that don't have to involve the outside world. Like I can be certain that I'm going to take care of my health no matter what. That doesn't involve, you know, whether the death count is accurate or not. You know, it doesn't involve whether the CDC knows what they're doing or not. Like I think it's just coming back to the things that you actually have control of and building your certainty out of those things.
There's a lot of like stoicism that permeates in that. And I know one of the things you talk about with having your values is like healthy values are ones that stem from actually things that you can control that are socially acceptable. Could you talk a bit about like how you see values and how, I guess, to figure out whether or not your value system is one that's operational and that's serving you or otherwise?
Yeah. So we all have to prioritize things in our lives. Like we all have to care about something, and whatever we choose to care about, we kind of prioritize those things. So maybe first is kids, and second is career, and third is family, and fourth is friends or whatever. But we all have a little like ladder in our brains of, you know, which slot each thing fits into. And that kind of value ladder determines our decision-making process. So if it's a choice between friends and career, if we value our career more, we do the thing that helps our career. If it's between family and career, if we value our family more, we choose family. And our values are expressed through our actions and our decisions. So, you know, it's very, what you see a lot is people say that they value something. It's like, oh, I really value honesty and integrity, but then they go around and lie to everybody. So it's you can say you value whatever you want, but really your values are demonstrated through your actions. And a lot of subtle art is simply, the problem is that most people aren't even aware that this kind of decision-making process is going on in their head. They aren't aware of their own values. We all think we're like great, wonderful people. And so we don't actually stop and look at our actions objectively and recognize where maybe some of the things that we're attached to, the values that we're attached to that aren't helping us, that are causing us to harm or damage other aspects of our lives. So a lot of subtle art is simply helping people see their own values clearly, ask the questions that will help them see their own values clearly, and then suggesting um, uh, ways to go about changing their values or improve upon their values.
And that seems to tie into what you talk about, like when choosing your pain, where I think a lot of people, they look at like, what do I want? What is the reward I want? But they're not looking at that path of sacrifice that it takes to get that $1 million job a year in finance or whatever it's going to be. It's like, no, I don't want to be going in on Saturdays and doing 100-hour weeks. So I guess what is that path in terms of how do you choose your pain?
Yeah. So it's the path to choosing your values is through the path of pain. It's easy to want the benefits of everything. It's easy to want to be popular. It's easy to want to have a great relationship. It's easy to want to be rich. Like we all want to be rich and popular and happy. Like it's the same shit. What differentiates us, what actually determines who you are versus who I am versus who somebody watching this is what pain that we choose to bring into our lives. So, we all want to be happy and successful and everything, but some of us are more comfortable or actually enjoy certain sacrifices more than others. Some of us enjoy working weekends. Some of us enjoy, like, for instance, for me, I enjoy the solitude that comes with writing. A lot of people don't. I enjoy the kind of anxiety and emotional stress that comes with putting my work out in public consistently. A lot of people really don't. Whereas there are some people who like really enjoy sitting down with a spreadsheet for 3 hours. Like that sounds like hell to me, so it's actually the things that we don't like. It's not that we don't enjoy them. It's actually the things that are stressful and cause us the struggle, that differentiate who we are and what we care about and our paths towards those things that we want: success, happiness, relationships, whatever. And so instead of thinking about the positive thing that you want, I always implore people, think about the sacrifices that you want. What is the pain that you enjoy that most people don't? If you find that, that's probably a career waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it seems like when you initially say that, most people's response is like, well, fuck, like I don't want to go towards pain. Like we're designed to move away from pain. But then if you have if you can go into that reflective state and you're like, well, there's probably pain that I'm suffering that I don't realize I'm doing. Like you're saying, it's like you could be enjoying something that other people see as suffering as well. And then you just don't recognize it because it's you.
Yeah. Sometimes in talks, I describe it as like, what kind of masochist are you? Because we've all got like one little thing that is just, we kind of enjoy being tortured by it. And usually within that, there's like a nugget of some sort of passion or purpose that we can cling on to. And the other thing I say to people is like, there's no such thing as a pain-free life. Like no matter whether you want to, doesn't matter what you want to do with your life, it's impossible to experience a life without some sort of sacrifice, without some sort of discomfort. And so if that's just reality, like if you can never get away from the struggle, then you might as well choose the struggles you want to have. Like if struggle is inevitable, then by definition, a good life is having struggles you want.
Yeah. And it seems to stem because you have a background in Buddhism, or you've studied a lot of Buddhism. And I mean, all of the great religions seem to like start from the fundamental truth that life is suffering. And then your goal within that is then, okay, how do I find a meaning that justifies or offsets the suffering that I'm experiencing?
Yeah. It's like, what makes this pain worth it? Instead, most people's instinctive reaction is, I want to get rid of the pain. I don't want to have pain. Pain is bad. A lot of what I try to do is to just shift people over to, don't get rid of the pain, but, find something that makes the pain worth it.
Mm-hmm. And you can't have a neutral life either, because if there's suffering and then you need meaning to offset it, but you don't find meaning, then you're just left with the suffering. And so that's kind of why you seem to be pushing people towards like, you need to find a way to give less fucks about the things that don't matter so you can focus on the things that bring you meaning.
Yeah. Because if you don't find anything meaningful in your life, like your brain is a meaning machine. So if you don't find anything that's meaningful, your brain is going to start finding the stupidest shit and make it meaningful, you know? And so, and that's why you see people who like get unbelievably upset at Starbucks because their coffee came wrong. You know, it's like, okay, clearly they don't have anything more important going on in their life right now. Otherwise they wouldn't be so upset about this.
Yeah. What do you find people get wrong or miss in your book that you're trying to communicate, if anything?
Um, well, it's funny because I think a lot of people still get hung up. It's funny how powerful a title is. Like I titled the book. I mean, obviously the titles is a little bit tongue in cheek. And I also titled it understanding that it's not literally what the book is about. Like the book is about values. It's about finding things that are worth struggling for and things that you care about, or things that are worth giving a fuck about. And the title says how to not give a fuck. And so I'm still consistently surprised how many people still interpret the message of the book in terms of not giving a fuck. They're like, oh yeah, how do I not give a fuck? I want to give fewer fucks. And it's like, well, dude, you're kind of missing the point here. Or the worst is like when I go into interviews and sometimes the first thing they ask me is like, why shouldn't we give a fuck? And I'm like, apparently you didn't make it past page 10.
Yeah, well, and you address that because it's not about having an indifference towards life where you're just like, because typically that just has some narcissism baked in. And I think the
Totally.
line you use is like, if you're not washing your hair because you want to look grungy, it's because you care so much about what people think about your hair or any number of things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't, it's impossible to not care about anything. You have to care about something. And so even if you're trying to not care about anything, that's still caring about something. So it's we're again, like struggle, like ultimately we have to care about something. Therefore we might as well be conscious and deliberate about what we care about.
What are the things that you let go of as you were kind of going through your own journey? Because I know one of the things you mentioned is like really wanted to be a rock star for a long time and then realized you just wanted the rewards of a rock star, not dealing with all of the suffering that comes along with that.
Yeah. I've had to let a lot of things go over the years. You know, when I was younger, I had a lot of ambitions and kind of twisted ideas. You know, looking back, it was just a lot of like 20-year-old dude stuff. Like it was, I wanted to be like the cool guy at the party, and I wanted to like date all the girls, and I wanted to travel to all these exotic locations. You know, a lot of it was just vanity, and it was stupid. Like it was fun. Like don't get me wrong, but it was I put way too much emphasis of my time and energy on it, and I think by the time I got to my 30s, I started to not regret that, but like lament it a little bit. You know, like wow, I spent so much time and energy on like a lot of frivolous stuff. And I think that realization is a little bit of where that book came from, was just understanding like, wow, I really got wrapped up in some really silly stuff.
Was that just a natural progression of like getting older and getting tired of it? Or was this like a conscious, like, hey, I need to change this or move in a different direction, or I can't keep doing this? Like, how were you processing all that?
I think it was a little bit of both. You know, one thing that I found, and I think I talk about this in the book, is that like anything that you value in the external world is there's a diminishing returns to it, right? So if you have no money, $1,000 is a really big deal. If you have $10,000, $1,000 is still a big deal, but it's not like the biggest deal in the world. If you have $100,000, then $1,000 is like, oh, okay, well that's nice, you know. So at some point, the same effort produces a diminishing emotional return. It's the same thing with where I really started to notice it was with travel. You know, I lived nomadically for 7 years, and the first couple of years it was incredible. You know, if you've only been to 5 countries, country number 6 is pretty fucking amazing. But if you've been to 55 countries, then country 56 is like, wow, why did I spend all this money and energy? And, you know, this looks like the last 3 countries I went to. And so I noticed myself not appreciating the experiences as much as I used to. And then on top of that, over a long period of time, my constant focus on things like travel and partying and dating, I noticed that it was having a negative effect on more important areas of my life. So, friends and family, my career, my business started to reach the point where it was like, I really should be in the United States and I really should be investing a lot more time and energy into it. And if you're like out drinking at 3 a.m. in Brazil, like that's not very conducive to building a successful online business. And so it was a mixture of the two, of just, it started feeling empty, but then it was starting to hurt things that actually mattered to me.
How do metrics tie into values? Because it seems like you start with figuring out what your values are, choosing, or I guess selecting the healthy ones, and then how do you come up with kind of the metrics that become that feedback loop for whether or not you're getting closer to or further away from your values?
Yeah, it's a good question, because choosing values is hard by itself, but then metrics, ultimately, whatever you value, you have to choose a way to measure that value. So if I decide I want to be a successful person, we all want to be a successful person, but we all have different definitions of success. Maybe my definition of success is to like buy a house. Maybe your definition of success is to buy an island, and like that, if those different definitions will determine completely different decisions and perspectives as we go through life. And so there are a lot of values that are fine to have, like, something like success is a perfectly fine value to have, or being wealthy, that's a perfectly fine value to have. But we can get in a lot of trouble in terms of how we define success or wealth for ourselves. If we define it in such a way that is unrealistic or just very self-serving, like it can become very damaging.
How do you rank order those values? Because saying there's no problem with having wealth as a value, but then if you have all these other values that kind of play into that, how do you rank order them? Or is that something you recommend doing? Or do you have like a primary value and then like sub values that nest under it?
I think we do kind of have a primary value, and then everything kind of falls into place. And generally, you don't really consciously choose the order your values are in. Your decisions kind of choose for you, right? So it's, and again, you notice through action. So if somebody values their friends and family and being successful and wealthy, but they keep ditching their friends and family to work more or to like launch a new product or whatever, they can say whatever they want, but it's like that wealth and success has become their primary value. I generally, one of the things I talk about in Everything is Fcked is that pretty much any value that you put as that primary value it is going to start to cannibalize all of your other values. It becomes like the prism by which you see everything else. So for instance, like people who are very, very attached to money, for instance, they tend to see everything else in terms of money. They see relationships in terms of money. They see happiness in terms of money. They see health in terms of money. People who are extremely attached or whose primary value is their family, like they will view everything else in terms of family. They will view their career in terms of family. They'll view their friendships in terms of family. And so it's really that kind of top value that we have to be very, very careful about and not let it run amok, because I think any value, any primary value ultimately has a tendency to destroy a lot of other stuff, or like it wants to take over your entire life, and you have to balance yourself out so that it doesn't.
So if somebody recognizes that and they're like, okay, yep, I do have, say, money as my primary value, and I have noticed that infecting these other areas of my life, and maybe I don't want it to be that way, what does that person do? Because it seems like a tough thing that's probably rooted in a lot of childhood stuff. Like, how do you begin unraveling that or adjusting that mindset?
It's hard, but ultimately the our values determine our decisions, but our decisions actually end up determining our values. You know, it's kind of like a full circle thing.
Yeah.
So a way to break that chain is to start making decisions based on some other value. And it's incredibly hard to do that at first. It'll feel insane to you. It'll feel uncomfortable. You'll be anxious. You'll be insecure. But, you know, the next time that some opportunity comes up of like, okay, well, I can go into work on Saturday and work an extra 10 hours, or I can spend it, you know, with my sister who's visiting in town, you know, changing that decision towards family part, because the decisions matter. It's, you can do all sorts of mental gymnastics, and sometimes the mental gymnastics can help. But they only help insofar that they make the decision more likely. You know, you can get caught up here all day, every day for years and years and years, and your decisions actually never change. So the mental stuff is only useful if it actually gets your decisions to change. And then once the decisions happen, so like once you do decide to spend the weekend, say, with your family instead of working, you actually start to experience the benefits of that value. You actually realize like, wow, it feels good to spend time with my family. Wow, my relationships got better. You know, my sister's not mad at me anymore, things like that. And you're like, maybe I should do this more often. And slowly, you know, that value starts to climb the ladder in your brain.
I like that. Yeah, we were talking to James Clear a couple of weeks ago, author of Atomic Habits, and he was talking about how your habits are basically like every time you perform it, you're casting a vote for the identity that you want to have. And it sounds similar to what you're saying, where it's like, even if you have this as your primary value, but you want this to probably get a bit more in line, it's like every time you're faced with the decision and you choose that one, you're casting a vote to start building that identity back up.
Absolutely. Totally.
Do you like the title of like self-help author? Do you like that genre, or do you see yourself differently?
I sometimes joke that I'm a self-hating self-help guru.
Okay.
which always throws people for a loop. Because the last person who's supposed to hate themselves is a self-help guru. I'm not a huge fan of the moniker, not because it's a bad moniker, but just because of all the trashy, cheesy stuff in the industry. So it's just something I live with. I understand that like this is the industry I'm in, and I try to do the best I can with it.
So what are some of those things that give you pause about the self-help industry? Because I know one of the ones you talk about that resonated with me is like the self-esteem movement that came about in the 70s, and how that just kind of like all of the modern day ramifications of that, and Jonathan Haidt's The Coddling of the American Mind, and just along those topics. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that seems to be one of the issues that you have with it.
Yeah, it's my biggest issue, if I were to sum it up in general. I think the self-help industry is optimized to make people feel better, not to necessarily be better. And those are two very different things. Sometimes they happen together. Sometimes being better does feel better, but a lot of times being better does not feel good. Especially at first, especially the first few times you're a better person, it's often excruciatingly painful. And so I think somewhere along the line, the industry really mixed those things up. In terms of self-esteem is one component of that. I think there are a lot of things that went into it. One is just that feeling better is much more marketable to a mass audience. Telling people like, hey, you're going to have to reevaluate a lot of your major life decisions and come to terms with a lot of your shitty choices, and painstakingly change yourself over a long period of time. Here, buy my book. Like, that's not an exciting sales pitch. Whereas like, hey, 3 steps to make you happy forever, that's a very enticing type of thing. But in terms of the self-esteem movement, I think it was a lot of well-intentioned people that just got carried away. Back in the 60s and 70s, this idea of self-esteem kind of emerged to the fore. Psychologists started doing a lot of research, and they generally found that people who performed very well in all sorts of different arenas generally felt better about themselves. They tend to believe that they were good people and capable, and they were confident about themselves and all that. And at some point, people decided that, okay, they perform well because they feel good about themselves. So if we can just make everybody feel good about themselves, then everybody will perform well. And then nobody actually like stopped and to think about, maybe they feel good about themselves because they perform well. Maybe they got it backwards.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. Maybe you should perform well first, and then you'll feel good about yourself. And so there was just a lot of this school of thought. It infiltrated the self-help industry. It infiltrated education. It actually infiltrated a lot of churches and religious movements in the West.
And sports, yeah.
Sports, absolutely. And so, by the time you get to our generation, it's like, everybody gets a trophy for showing up, and, everybody's a genius who just hasn't discovered themselves yet. And everybody is exquisitely special in their own way, even if they can't see it. And it's like, well, maybe not. Maybe actually, like, most of like, we kind of suck at most things we do. Like, humans are just pretty bad at most things we do. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to be like Steve Jobs or whoever, Bill Gates. Like, maybe that's fine. Like, you're not a bad person for not doing those sorts of things. So, I sometimes think of my work I sometimes call it like a negative self-help. It's a self-help where the starting place, instead of the starting place being, you deserve to be happy, you deserve to feel better. My starting place is like, no, life is fucking hard and it sucks sometimes. Let's just do the best we can with that. Understanding that that's always going to be true no matter what we do.
That's a jagged pill to swallow, but it seems like you're saying it's a hard thing to sell, but clearly based on your success, like, there was such a massive hunger for a message like this. And I imagine that's just propped up by these like 30, 40, 50 years of being told, like, no, you're perfect the way you are. Everything's fine. You don't need to change. And it's like, well, no, because my life still sucks. And now you're telling me I don't have a reason for it to suck.
Yeah. And this is one thing that Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book, is that it's you're not serving, when you raise an entire generation to believe that they are like a chosen one, that they are special and amazing and their life is going to be incredible and they can do whatever they want. As soon as they hit reality and they realize, like, okay, wait, I'm not that special. I'm not very good at most things I do. I can't do anything I want. Everything's fucking hard. There's a real distress that happens. Like, people get really, really upset, and a lot of people process that very internally. Some people kind of blame the world for being horrible and unfair, but I think most people kind of blame themselves. They're like, well, shit, I thought I was supposed to be amazing and special, and here I am, like, pushing papers across a desk at 26, and I thought I'd be doing more by now. And like, that's a very, very upsetting thing to come to terms with. And so a lot of it, maybe it's just I'm trying to like make humility cool again.
Seems like it's working. Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things you talk about that just seems, again, like, so many of the basic truths in life are pretty obvious, and it just takes somebody calling them out. And so when you say, what is it, that like visualizing a positive experience is in and of itself a negative experience because you're just focusing on everything that you lack.
Yeah, the desire for a positive experience is a negative experience. I mean, desire in general, this definitely comes from Buddhism, of like, the attachment to anything that is not real or present it causes suffering, because it just simply reminds us of what we are not, what we fail to attain, what we lack in our lives. But paradoxically, an acceptance of a negative experience, or the acceptance of a lack of something or a loss of something, becomes a positive experience because we make amends with our current situation. We come to terms with reality, and that's actually a very liberating and freeing experience.
Yeah. Yeah. You have the hilarious line, something about a happy woman's not looking in the mirror telling herself that she's happy. She just is happy.
Yeah. I mean, if you're happy, you don't have to fucking tell yourself you're happy. Like that's just, it's very, to bring it back to the rich guy thing. It's like a rich guy who has to like show everybody how rich he is. He's like, well, dude, if you were actually rich, you wouldn't have to show anybody. Like if you were actually confident, you wouldn't have to prove to people how confident you are. Um, it's one of those things that like, as soon as you have to say it, then you're not it.
Did you get into all of it? Because you used to work in finance, right?
Um, for about 6 weeks.
Yeah. So actually, funny enough, so I worked in finance for about 8 months, and that's where I came across your work while I was sitting in my cubicle reading your website. I'm like, man, I need to get the fuck out of here. And so then I went and started working in startups. So I owe that to you.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I worked in finance for a grand total of 6 weeks, and it was funny. I remember, speaking of values, I remember sitting around with my team. I worked for an investment bank in Boston, and I remember sitting around with my team, and we were all like, the markets were about to close, and so we were all kind of like just kicking back and hanging out for a little bit, and somehow it came up. We were all like early mid-20s, straight out of school, the grunts in the bank, and somehow it came up with like what we were gonna do if we made six figures. Like what would we do with the money? And one by one, everybody on my team went around and they were like, man, I'd buy a BMW. And the next person's like, I'd buy a boat, and I'd buy this, and I'd buy that. And then it got to me, and I'm like, I'd take a year off and like travel around the world. And there was just this awkward silence. Like everybody just kind of looked at me as if I had farted or something. And then it just went to the next person. And he's like, yeah, man, I'd buy a motorcycle. Like, I'm like, I don't think I fit in here. This is not really working out well. But yeah, I had already started my web business prior to that, but I hadn't really, my website had kind of just been a side hustle at the time. And in my mind, it was like, oh yeah, I'll just do this for some extra bucks. Until I get like a real career going. And it was right around that time I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, actually in the bank. Because I was like so bored, I was actually like reading books in the bank. And I read 4-Hour Workweek, and I was like, man, I got to get the hell out of here. Like this is this is the complete opposite of what I want to be doing with my life.
How about the philosophical side of this? Were you always just like a student of philosophy, or did that come later?
No, so that's just always been with me. I was raised in a pretty conservative part of Texas. Church was like the center of everybody's social life, and I've always been like very contrarian and a little bit rebellious. And so I just never really got into the whole religion thing. I just never really bought into it. And when you're in a conservative part of Texas, like that doesn't go over very well. So, and so I felt like I felt constantly challenged to really think about a lot of these things in life. And so I started reading philosophy when I was in high school. I started reading a lot of psychology around the same time. I started reading about all the different religions, about Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism and all these things, just because like, it's like everybody around me was, I don't know. I just felt this constant need to understand what the hell like humans were doing. Like why do we believe the things we believe? Why do we act the way we act? Why do we make the choices that we make? So it was a hobby throughout my whole life, and it never occurred to me that it could actually become a career. But that's the beautiful thing about that's the beautiful thing about, something that you really are passionate about, is that it's like breathing air to you. Like, it's so natural to you that it never even occurs to you, like, oh, this could be a job,
Yeah. Well, what I
until it
find
is.
what I find interesting about that is that in situations like that, it's not that you didn't want a belief system, but it was just didn't want the one that was handed to you and wanted to be able to like build that yourself. I think Emerson has a line about just like reading all of the great books and then basically Bruce Leeing it and taking the best of everything and creating your own religion or your own philosophy around it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember consciously thinking to myself, because I would butt heads a lot with people in my family and community. And I remember at some point, I think when I was probably 13 or 14, um, coming to the conclusion of like, okay, how about I start at zero, and then I look, everything is on the table, it's like everything is a possibility. Let me start. I'll spend like my teenage years, like just looking through each thing one by one until I find something that resonates with me. And for me, by the time I got to 20, it was Buddhism. And I really got into Buddhism for about 4 or 5 years. And it was very impactful on me.
Was that isolating, like socially or with friends and things like that? Because that seems like a young age for most people to be getting into that.
It was. I was definitely like the kid who dressed in all black and sat in the back of the classroom and like didn't talk to anybody. But the fortunate thing is that you had your other misfits. Um, it's like, I assume it's true in most places you grow up, but especially where I grew up, it was, you know, the in crowd was like the mainstream majority, but you had the people who were like kind of out, so like the goth kids and the nerd kids, and um, like, so you just kind of found your crew eventually.
Mm-hmm. How do how do you think about happiness? Like, what is happiness? Is that a goal that makes sense to aim towards?
I think of happiness is the side effect of doing things that feel important and worthwhile. So I don't think it's happiness as a goal is very useful. I think if you get the other stuff right, then the happiness will happen on its own.
What were some of the biggest impactful books for you as you were going through this period?
Whew, man. When I was young, I was really into. So here's the other thing. I have to give a shout out. I have to give a credit to
Sure.
my namesake. I wish I was related to him, but I'm not. I was a '90s kid, so Marilyn Manson was a huge deal when I was growing up, and he was very rebellious, and he was anti-religion, and so I was very drawn to him. And one of the cool things about Marilyn Manson, especially back then, was that his message. He had the whole shock thing on stage, and he'd do crazy shit, but if you listen to him in interviews, his message was actually like, think for yourself. Like, you don't have to buy into the scripts and the narratives and the belief systems that your parents give you, your teachers give you, you know, your community gives you. Like, you can go find it out for yourself. And in a really weird way, like, he was kind of a role model for that. I think that's kind of what his whole message was. It got lost to people who weren't fans of him, but um, and so he really inspired me. Like, he was the one. I actually discovered Nietzsche through him. Um, I actually discovered Emerson and Kierkegaard through him. And so I remember struggling through some of those philosophy books in high school and trying to make sense of them. And at least, even though looking back, like, I didn't really understand them, but just the process of trying and learning was like very satisfying in and of itself. Um, and and so it's some of that early philosophy was very impactful for me. I'd say once I got to, and then there was the Buddhism phase, and I'd say when I got to my early 20s, a lot of the early kind of like the internet marketing and I guess like digital age type book, stuff like 4 Hour Work Week was big. um realizing that you could just build, like anybody could build a business online, that there was like very low barriers to entry, low startup costs, um, just learning about business, and that, you know, anybody could kind of bootstrap it. Like that was huge in my 20s for sure.
And what are the things you're reading now or returning to?
Um, these days it's funny. I went back to a lot of the philosophy I read when I was younger. I kind of had this phase a couple years ago after Subtle Art that I just read a ton of philosophy again, and I got really into it. Um, you know, these days I'm more, I read a lot of, I'm reading more fiction, and I'm reading a lot more just like science.
Hmm.
And I don't really, you know, I try not to think too much about like where my brain goes. I just kind of try to follow it. You know, like whatever is shiny and exciting in my brain, I just let it go there and kind of just trust that good things will happen. Um, so that's kind of where my brain's going right now.
Nice. Are you working on any new projects or big things kind of down the line?
Oh man. Yeah, a lot of big things. So the biggest one, I mean, I just had an audiobook come out. It's an Audible original. It's called Love Is Not Enough. It's about relationships. That was a ton of fun. It was very interesting too. I'd never done like an audio product
It's
before.
Audible only.
Yeah, Audible
Oh,
only.
cool.
And it's like, I'd say it's like a third. So it's basically a book built off of conversations I have with people about their relationship problems.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a lot of fun to make. There's some juicy stuff in there. Uh,
Well, what are some of those? Because I imagine a lot of people stuck indoors with their partner and their family. Any advice you could share?
um,
Conflict
well,
resolution side or communication wise?
communication wise, for sure. You know, one thing I've been telling people during this period is like, look, whether you like it or not, like if you're stuck inside with your partner for a long period of time, whether you like it or not, if there are issues in the relationship that are going to show up, like you can no longer avoid it. You can no longer distract yourself from it. Like it's going to be there front and center. And so I've just been encouraging people to deal with those issues sooner rather than later. And, because who knows how long this thing is going to go on. And also it would suck to live with a person 24/7 where you're constantly like sweeping things under the rug and pretending things are not being said or happening. Um, but yeah, I mean, the book is very much, you know, my whole shtick with in the relationship category is well, it's kind of the same thing as the other categories, but it's like people kind of idealize love. They think that love, they optimize their relationships for love, whereas uh, it's very similar to happiness. It's like if you get the values right in your relationship, then the love will happen as a side effect. If you just go for the love, there are a lot of very unhealthy forms of love out there. Like you can you can love somebody and they can love you, and you can be very bad for each other. And so the book is really just looking at kind of how that plays out and how you can kind of navigate that. But the project I'm actually finishing up right now is I'm helping Will Smith write his memoir, and
Whoa.
and so yeah, I'm actually just finishing up the first draft right now,
Oh,
and
that's amazing.
that has been awesome. It's been a ton of fun.
Wow. I was just talking to my girlfriend probably 2 days ago about who is cooler, Will Smith or The Rock, and I think we both decided that it's Will Smith is just like the greatest man all around.
Dude, he's and I always tell, because obviously everybody's like, what's he like? What's he like? And I'm like, he's exactly how you think he is. Like it's, if you go on his Instagram, or if you watch any episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he's not acting. Like that is just exactly, he's just a big goofball all the time. But he's a really awesome guy, and it's been very smart, very hardworking, and a really, really interesting life story. So it's been a real joy for me to kind of take somebody um, who's just had such an incredible life, and help him share that with people. There's just a lot of things that he's never talked about publicly before that are going to be in the book, and it's really exciting to
That's
be a part of
awesome.
it.
That's
Yeah.
super cool. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thanks, man.
How did that come about? Can I ask?
Yeah, they reached out to me. Um, he read Subtle Art and really liked it, and he had actually been kind of looking for an author to work with for a few years. And from what I hear, he met with a couple others, and things just didn't really click. Um, and so I just went through this long, bizarre process of being interviewed like 5 times by like everybody around him. All these gatekeepers had to like give the check off, for me to meet him. And then meeting him was super weird because it's, if it's like you and me, it's like, hey, Chris, like, what are you doing tomorrow? Want to grab a beer? It's like, yeah, sure. With Will, it's like, you'll get an email and they're like, can you come to London? And I'm like, sure. Like, when? And they're like, tomorrow morning. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, okay. And, you just clear your entire calendar.
The helicopter's in your lawn.
Yeah, right. And but then, it's like once I met him, he's just a great dude, tons of fun. And we clicked. Like we just really hit it off, and things just kind of rolled naturally from there. I presented him. I hung out with him for like 3 days. I wasn't even told to do anything. They were like, yeah, just hang out with him. And then on the 3rd day, he just out of the blue, he was like, yo, so what's up? Like, we gonna write a book or what? And I'm like, I was like, well, I've got an idea for an outline, but I need to go write it up. And I actually did have an idea for an outline. And he was like, okay, cool, write it up. And then I ran to my hotel room and I like wrote a bunch of stuff up. And then I came back and showed it to him the next day. And he was like, that's it, man. Hell yeah, let's do it. Like, I'm in. And it was crazy. Incredible. It was like, I was like, is this happening? Like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's got to feel incredibly surreal.
Yeah, it was super weird. Yeah, no, he loved the book idea. He got up and started like running around the table. He was like, oh, that's hot. Oh, that's hot. I'm like, I think this is good. But, and he like started FaceTiming people being like, I'm going to write a book. And I'm like, okay, I think I have the job, and it was wild. It was really, really weird. And it was super weird too, because I was told to not tell anybody. Like through this whole process, I couldn't really tell people where I was or what I was doing. And so yeah, I just like came home one day and I'm like, hey, I'm writing Will Smith's book. And everybody like looked at me like, what? Really? So it was fun.
Do you guys have a release date yet, or when's it coming out?
It'll be next year sometime. I don't know when. I just finished the first draft. I'm actually going through doing some edits and revisions and stuff right now. So we'll I'm about to hand it off to him, and then he'll work on it throughout the summer, and then hopefully we'll have something for people next year.
Awesome. Well, hey, if there's anything AppSumo can do to help promote it, we would absolutely be interested in that.
I'll run it by his people.
Cool, man. So I know we're running up on time, but I guess any final things you would recommend for people while they're stuck at home in terms of like how they can use this time as like a live time, not dead time, how to take advantage of it and maybe use this to explore what they want or what direction they want to take things for their life?
I think, this period, it's kind of like it's like a pause button on life, right? So I try to think of it as it's like a sandbox you get to play in. So if there are any ideas that you've had for projects or careers or new hobbies you want to pick up, like this is the time to do it. And, for me in particular, I've tried to use this time to explore some business ideas that were kind of in the back of my mind, but never really made sense because I was always busy traveling and doing all these other things. And so I actually dabbled in a few different things during this period. I came up with an outline for a novel I came up with an idea for like a piece of software that could go along with my business. Well, I don't know if any of this stuff's actually going to happen, but it was just a cool period for me to play and discover things. And so I think if anything, like it's ironic, right? Because it's like our daily lives are so busy. We're like, man, I wish I could have like a month off or just think or whatever. And then it's like you get the month off and you're like, fuck, what do I do? It's like use this time, use it to think. Like having a bunch of downtime, the way you make it valuable is by experimenting and exploring. So this is the time to do it.
Perfect. Well, Mark, thank you so very much. This was a huge honor for me. Your work has had a massive impact on my life over the past however many years since I first came across you. And thank you very much for doing this. This was super cool. You gave a ton of really valuable stuff and told some awesome stories for folks. Thank you very much. Where can people check you out? Do you send them over to markmanson.net?
Yeah, markmanson.net. Join the email newsletter. I send something out every Monday. And then check out the books. Subtle Art Not Giving a Fuck, Everything's Fucked, a book about hope and love is not enough. And then, of course, Will's book coming next year sometime. So thanks for having me. This was
awesome.
Fun.
Thank you so much. Stay safe and well. And we'll be talking to everybody soon. Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Take care.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye, everyone.